Hi there. So here we have a Raspberry Pi Model 4. This is the 4GB variant, and an electronic load, which is the EBD-USB Plus, made by a company called ZKETECH. So what we're going to try and do in this video to see is if we can get the electronic load to run on the Raspberry Pi. Now, normally the electronic load needs a Windows laptop based around the i386 processors, etc. And obviously this is an ARM processor, which is a completely different architecture. So we're going to see if we can get this to run using some clever emulator software. See if we can get it running on here. Now, obviously, if we can get it running on here, then it gives us a few options in terms of being able to run this thing. For example, this is a little credit card sized board. It doesn't take up much room. So obviously it gives us the ability to potentially put this somewhere inside a small unit that's a lot smaller than something like a PC or a laptop. And then we can do things like running it headless. So we can remote into it, monitoring what this thing is doing. For example, if we're doing a long running battery test. So right, let's jump onto the Raspberry Pi now and see if we can get this thing working. So here we are on the Raspberry Pi. Now this is just running the default operating system Raspbian, and in order to get the electronic load running on here, we need to install a few other things. First off, we need to get the Windows based software for the electronic load, which you can get from the ZKETECH website. I'll put a link in the description. And here we're just going to download the English version. Now note this is in a RAR file, so you will need to extract the software out of that. Within this download is also the Windows drivers, which you don't need, and a user manual, which you may or may not need. But yeah, the main setup is in there, so you'll need to extract that and make it available. And here we have a copy here. So this is the name of the setup. In order to actually run the software on a Linux platform, we're going to try using software called Wine. So Wine is a piece of software that runs on x86 based Linux machines. Obviously the ARM processor on a Raspberry Pi is not going to work. So in order to have Wine run on the Pi, we also need to run an emulator, which is called Box86. Now this is a relatively new emulator, but it's really, really good. It's still currently in development, but is already capable of running lots of x86 based software. It's predominantly for games, but you can actually run Wine on this, and yeah, it's improving all the time, and it's pretty impressive what they've managed to achieve so far. So what we're going to need to do first is get Box86 set up. Now if you come to the main GitHub page, I'll put a link in the description as well, and you scroll down here, then there will be some compilation instructions. At the moment there's no packages that I'm aware of, but in order to run this, you just need to compile it, and to be honest, it takes a few minutes on the Pi. So basically there's some helpful information here. So you would just pretty much cut and paste this into a terminal window, and this will basically just get the code, download it from GitHub, and build and install Box86, so it's ready to go. Once it's finished, you can pretty much go to the terminal and type Box86, and hopefully it should come up with this help information to show that it's running. Now in order to install Wine, because it's x86 based, we need to get hold of some binaries that will work with Box86, and fortunately there is a version of Wine that is available with Twister OS, which is a slightly different operating system that you can run on the Pi, and this will probably be capable of running the software as well, but for the purpose of this demo we're just going to use the standard Raspbian OS. And if you come to the FAQ page, again I'll put a link in the description, then you should see a link down here somewhere. There it is. to actually download Wine. So obviously this comes as an archive which you need to extract into a folder called Wine, or whatever you like, and within that there'll be a bin directory, and then from that you should be able to run Wine. So if we come to the terminal, so once you've downloaded this, if you go to the bin directory under Wine, and if we just type Wine straight up, then as expected it doesn't work. So what we need to do is to actually stick box86 in front of it, so that when we do run it, and let's say we run it with version, you can see that it comes up with the version number of Wine to show that that's working. Now, one of the things you have to be a bit careful of when you're running Wine is that Wine needs to have a thing called a memory split set up, so which is similar to what would be on an x86, which is basically described as 3G / 1G. Now, if you're running a Raspberry Pi 4, that should be fine, because the 3G 1G split is how the kernel is been configured by default. But if you're using, for example, a Model 3 or any earlier versions, then those kernels came in a 2G configuration, so Wine will not run. And what you'll see is if you try to run it, is an error basically telling you that the way the virtual memory has been set up is not going to work. So the way around that, and I won't cover it in this video, but basically you need to recompile the kernel using the 3G 1G split like on a Raspberry Pi 4, and then you need to install that on the Raspberry Pi, and then you should be able to run Wine. The other alternative is, of course, trying to get Wine to work with a 2G, but I think it's probably easier to compile the kernel. But just a quick note, if you are compiling the kernel on a Raspberry Pi 3, it does take a while. So you're maybe better off compiling it on another machine. If you go to the Raspberry Pi website, there are some details around compiling the kernel and how to do that. But anyway, back to this. So yeah, we've got box86 running, and now we've got Wine working. So all that's left to do now is to install the software. So we type in here box86, and then we put in the location of the installer here. Let me just double check. So EB setup, downloads. Right, so when we run that, now hopefully then it should start the installer. Just close some of these windows. So normally when you're running stuff in here, because this is obviously still in development, you will see some errors in the window, but providing the actual software runs, then they can largely be ignored, unless of course there is a problem. And then you can normally put some things on the box86 or the Wine forums to try and get some more help. But as we can see here, the setup has now run, so we're just going to put in some information here, click next. Just going to leave the standard location and just leave all the defaults, and off we go. So as you can see here, it installs pretty quick, and it even puts some icons on here. Now if you're running these straight up, these aren't going to work, because this is obviously expecting this to have been installed on a x86 based Linux machine. So what we need to do is to amend any shortcuts here, and we just need to make sure that we stick the box86 command in front, so that when we run Wine, that it will actually run it under the emulator. So just going to change that to box86 and just put in the full path for Wine, and then we'll see what happens. So yeah, we'll give that a go, save that, close that down. So if we double click on this now, see if we can get the program to run. So there we go. So we can see here now we have the actual software running. So next step now is to actually attach the electronic load and see if we can get it to work. So we're just going to shut this down for now. Just say close software, yeah, minimize this. So what I'm doing now is plugging in the electronic load. Just using a standard USB cable. Now, just to make sure that the device is actually there, if we have a look in the dev folder, and if we look for the device name of TTY USB, then you can see that it's appeared here. So this is telling us that the USB device has been recognized. Now this ZKETECH uses I think it's a prolific 2302 USB to serial converter, which is a pretty bog standard piece of hardware that is actually recognized by the Raspberry Pi. So all the drivers should already be included as part of Raspbian, so you should be pretty much good to go. So the next thing we need to do is to make sure that the COM port is recognized within Wine. Now this should happen automatically, but there is a slight issue in that if we have a quick look at the devices folder that comes with Wine. So let's go to Pi DOS devices. So the .wine folder is like a hidden folder that is created by Wine, and this is where all the file systems and devices are stored in order for Wine to run. So if we look under here, at the moment I have the serial port, the default one that comes with the Pi enabled, and you can see that this is taking up COM1. And here on COM2 we have the electronic load installed. Now the problem is with the tester software is that if you have this on COM1, then the software won't recognize it, so you won't be able to select it. So it needs to be basically on any other ports. So for example, COM2 or higher should do the job. So we can see now that we have the USB load attached and we have it connected to the right COM port. So if I run the software again, hopefully, oops, let me try that again. Execute this. Let's give it a second to come up. Then as you can see now, COM2 has now appeared, which is a good sign. And hopefully then if we hit the connect button, as you can see, the device has connected. So, and here's some details here. So this should be pretty much good to go. So yeah, that's all for this video. I've not actually tested this extensively yet. There might be some other issues when you're actually doing a load test, but it's quite encouraging that we can actually get this to work. So yeah, I hope you found this video useful, and thanks for watching.